Hello, dreamers. Settle in, nestle beneath your blanket. Are you warm and comfortable? Good. Then let the world grow quieter around you. For tonight, we drift to a far-off valley, hidden behind hills of hush and fences of moonlight, to a town where time itself listens. The Clockmaker's Lullaby. There was once a town called Mellowhaven, tucked between two slow hills, where the clouds moved like sighs, and the breeze always smelled faintly of vanilla and rain. In Mellowhaven, time did not tick, it did not talk, it did not rush or roll or roar. Time waited, still, patient, unmoving. It waited for music. For without music, the air stayed quiet and thick, like a dream that wouldn't quite begin. The sun paused mid-rise. The flowers held their breath. Even the cats, who should have known better, remained frozen mid-stretch until the first sweet notes stirred the world awake. And at the very center of this strange and sleepy town stood a small round shop with shuttered windows and a bell above the door that rang only in whispers. Its walls were curved like the shell of a snail, and its chimney puffed lavender smoke on days when something lovely was about to happen. This was the workshop of a clockmaker named Elwin. Elwin was tall and thin like a reed, and had a beard that curled around his collar like spilt cream. His fingers were long and pointed, his voice soft and steady, and when he walked, he hummed, not songs exactly, but notes and half-tunes that made the air around him shimmer faintly. But Elwin was more than just a clockmaker. Each morning, before the sun could climb, Elwin would wake in the hush before dawn. He'd light a single candle, wrap himself in his softest wool cardigan, and begin his routine. First, he would wind the weather. Elwin would shuffle in his slippers to a tall wooden cabinet tucked behind a velvet curtain. The cabinet had many tiny drawers, each no bigger than a biscuit tin, labeled in looping gold script: sunlight, fog, drizzle, snow that melts before it lands, wind with a hint of cinnamon, and so on. He didn't choose at random. He never consulted a chart, and he did not take requests. Instead, he would stand there for a long while, eyes half closed, one hand resting on the cabinet's edge, and he would listen. Not with ears, but something quieter. He listened to the weight of the air pressing gently at the windows, to the mood of the morning mist, whether it curled with shyness or swaggered like a cat. He listened to the silence and how it sat, whether it leaned or stretched or shivered. Some said he could feel the pulse of the valley beneath his feet. And then, when the moment was right, he'd reach out and slide open a drawer. Inside each was a weather box, a delicate contraption no bigger than a ring box, with tiny cranks and winding coils. He'd lift one in his hand, turning it gently as though greeting an old friend, and wind it with 3 careful turns. No more, no less. The moment the box clicked into place, the chosen weather would rise like steam from a cup and drift through his chimney and into the sky. Sometimes the weather came in softly, a breeze that carried the scent of something almost remembered. Other times it arrived with a gentle grumble, like an old dog settling back into bed. It always felt right, as though the day had been waiting for that exact sky to unfold. After setting the weather into motion, Elwin would shuffle to the kitchen nook, no bigger than a cupboard, and begin the most sacred part of his morning, the teacup ritual. Not just any cup would do. He kept a dozen on a shelf, each with a different personality. One for quiet courage, one for soft rainy days, one for thinking deep thoughts. But he always chose just one. This too was a matter of feeling. He'd run his finger along their rims until one gave a barely audible chime, like a bell remembering a song, and that was the one. He'd fill it with a blend only he could name, a mix of dried violets, smoked vanilla, and something that smelled like the underside of a leaf. The kettle never whistled when the tea was ready. It sighed. He poured the tea in a slow spiral and let it steep while he leaned on the windowsill, eyes closed, nose tilted to the sky. When the scent finally curled upward, just right, warm, a little wistful, he'd take the first sip. And if it tasted like the beginning of a good day, he'd nod once and say, "Just so." Only then, with the flavor of tea still on his tongue, would Elwin step into his workroom. His instruments waited for him on a velvet cushion, a harp the size of a dinner plate made of glass spiderweb, a flute carved from driftwood and filled with salt-sweet breath, a stringed bowl whose knots were drawn with fingertips and a swirl of steam. He would pick one up, and he would begin to play. He played until the clocks resumed their gentle tick, until the birds opened their beaks mid-chirp, until a yawn curled out from someone's pillow, and time would begin again. Elwin had done this every day for as long as anyone could remember. He had no calendar, but he never forgot. He was as constant as the scent of lemon in the fields behind town. But one morning, the mist hung heavier than usual. The sky wore its gray shawl all wrong, and in the little round shop, the candle remained unlit. For on that day, friends, Elwin did not rise. The weather cabinet hummed with uncertainty. His instruments sat untouched. The clocks did not chime. And Mellowhaven held its breath. The baker's hands hovered above the morning dough. The librarian's cup remained halfway poured. A boy's wooden horse paused mid-rock on the front porch, for nothing dared move. And then, somewhere upstairs, a creak, a scuffle, and a very quiet, "Oh." It was Thimble, Elwin's granddaughter. She was no taller than the workshop table, with a halo of flyaway curls and socks that never matched. She had been asleep in the attic loft for months, where the beams creaked lullabies and the smell of old wood drifted down like dreams. But on that morning, she woke to the absence, not of sound, but of song. She bumbled down the attic steps, bare feet silent against the wood. She wandered about the house until she found Elwin, still asleep in his chair, a blanket tucked around him and his breath slow but steady. But he would not wake today, maybe not tomorrow either. Thimble walked over and stood beside the silent weather cabinet, her small hand rising and resting on a drawer labeled Uncertain Skies. She had watched Elwin many times, but never tried it herself. Still, she closed her eyes, breathed in the hush that blanketed the town, and listened, not just with her ears, but with that quiet place just behind her heart. The air felt heavy, but not sad. It smelled like damp earth and new beginnings. And so her hand moved, and the girl chose. Mist with gentle light. She opened the drawer, removed the contraption inside, and wound the tiny gear 3 times. A ribbon of pearly air rose like breath on glass and slipped up the chimney, whispering into the sky. The weather answered. The day began to stir. Thimble looked round the workshop. Her grandfather's instruments sat staring at her, elegant and ancient and full of mystery. But she tiptoed past them all. Instead, she found a rack of loose gears, a shelf of tuning forks and spoon handles, a bin of buttons, bells, and string. And she began to build. With trembling fingers and a frost full of concentration, she tied a ribbon through a thimble. She wrapped it in velvet and nestled it into a box of pine and honeycomb. She added keys from old typewriters, bits of shell, and a small copper fork that had once belonged to a fox. She turned the whole thing on its side, tied it shut with twine, and sat it gently in her lap. And then she played. It didn't sound like Elwin's songs. It didn't sound like anyone's. It clinked and clicked and shivered and trilled. There was a sigh, a rattle, a hopeful hum, a shush of breath, a hiccup of rhythm, a tinkling like stars bumping gently into each other. It was beautiful. Outside, the first bird moved its head. A drop of dew rolled from a leaf. A curtain fluttered. A foot shifted. A teacup clinked. Time had heard her, and time accepted. Thimble played until her fingers warmed, until the strange instrument rattled and sighed in tune with her breath. She felt like she was pulling a thread through the stillness and stitching the morning back together. The town exhaled. The clocks resumed. The morning tea steeped. The world spun, not too fast, not too slow, but just right. And from that day on, Thimble became the new keeper of the morning. She didn't always get it right. The town still speaks of the day she made it snow in summer. But the town didn't mind. They rather liked the surprise. And though Elwin never quite returned to his morning bench, he sat by the window and listened, eyes twinkling, beard warm with steam, a mug of tea always in hand. He felt Thimble's music made the town feel younger. He thought that time seemed to dance again. And so, if you ever wake in a town where the fog is sweet yet still, where your spoon waits for the music before stirring, where the bells in the roofs hum quietly with the clouds, listen closely. You just might hear her song, clinking, clacking, trembling with wonder, and you'll know the town is in good hands. And time can wait, because sleep is already here. Good night, dreamers.